On this AVNation special, we take a look at ice mapping in the NHL. What are some of the hurdles to getting into ice mapping, how you assess the customer's need, and training the staff that create these exceptional experiences. All that and more next on this AVNation special.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is an AVNation special. Ice mapping in the NHL. This is an AVNation special. My name is Tim Albright. I am your host. We are in the middle of the NHL playoffs, and my beloved St. Louis Blues are in it for the first time in 50 years. Not the last time, I'll say that. But one thing that's happened over the last number of years is a unique experience in the NHL called ice mapping. This is projection onto an ice, and some of the most unique experiences you will have is at an NHL game and also at an NBA game. A lot of these stadiums and a lot of these arenas are dual-use facilities. With us today to talk about how we created ice mapping are actually two folks, one from Quince Imaging and one from Image Engineering, that created the ice mapping for last year's NHL finalists, the Washington Capitals and the Las Vegas Golden Knights. First up is Eric Garita. Eric is from Quince Imaging. Welcome, Eric.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
And with us from Image Engineering is Nick Hawk and Ian Badaglari. Welcome, guys.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. And also with us is Joel St. Denis from Christie. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
All right, let's start with Eric here. Eric, walk me through the process of assessing a customer's needs when they come to you and they say, we want to do ice projection. What's your next steps from there?
So the first thing, there's two completely separate paths. Because this has gotten so popular, it comes down to whether it's going to be a rental installation or a permanent installation. For some of the playoffs runs, you get a lot of teams who are come around with quick needs, have a hot fan base, and really want to add a little bit of sizzle. But really, over the last couple of years, this technology has become so prominent. The first thing we assess is it better to rent to own, or purchase a system like this? Because really what it comes down to is once you have it once, the fans are going to come to expect this technology at the game. So, more recently, I'm going to go down just the path of the installation side of things, because that seems to be the popular route these days.
So you would recommend the installation route over the rental side?
Exactly. It's one thing, once you do it once, like I said, the fans come to expect it. So if you have it for a playoff run and a fan comes back the next game, it's almost like there's a piece of your opening, your period breaks, your post game. It's like there's a piece of the show missing. So in terms of actually assessing the needs, usually some of the first things we ask are going to be, what's the schedule? What is the timeline? And then, what are sort of the in-house capabilities? Are they looking for complete turnkey? Are they looking for integration with, say, a new center hung scoreboard? And then, what does their in-house content team look like? Are they looking for content support, design support, or are we just supporting them and creating templates and workflows for an existing design team that they may have in-house? Because there's a lot of different components to this. There's the projection hardware, rigging hardware, playback systems, alignment systems. It's really about chunking those up a little bit to determine, which pieces, how many pieces, and what level of each of these individual pieces the client's going to need.
All right, the guys from Image, let me get the same question from you. Walk me through the process from your perspective. When a customer comes to you and they say they want to do ice projection, right, or they want to do stadium projection, how do you assess their needs and to see, number one, whether or not they really want and they will need to do it, and then from there, what are their needs? How do we kind of do a needs assessment?
Sure. So the biggest thing that we really start with is what they're looking to get out of it. So what's the end goal for their fan base, their players, and for them as an organization. So we really want to hear what their goals, their aspirations are with this, so that we can, one, from a creative side, think of the best way that we can put a package together And then, going from there, we start to look at hardware and other pieces that are, are gonna help us reach that end goal. Nick, are there?
We also take a look at what their current technology platform is and how they're driving the creative and the timing of their shows as they are, and see what we need to do to work within that environment while also bringing in this extra added complexity and layer needed to do ice projection successfully.
So you take a look at kind of what they're already currently doing in their stadiums or in their arenas.
Correct. Yes. And because that's, Nick brings up a good point, is that this is going to be, when we look at ice projection or court projection, it's a completely new workflow, and they now need to add a whole nother layer to their game presentation. And, we need to understand how, not only what the creative elements are that they want to get out of this, and the game presentation aspects for fans and players, but also understand how they function as an organization and as a technical team, so that we can make sure the interface is going to be streamlined, user friendly, and work within their current process, so that we don't upset the apple cart, and that it all becomes very natural and intuitive when we turn the keys over.
And then the last thing we also kind of look at is we kind of bring in their building ops people, understanding how the building works and what else has to happen, because especially with projector placement is critical in delivering the best show. But if it's a venue where these projectors have to come in and out 30 times a year, it's not as big of a deal as a venue we were dealing with that the projectors have to come out almost between every show 100 times. So also just trying to understand that when we're walking in as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. All right, Joel, from a manufacturer standpoint, you're involved with these projects because they're high profile projects for the integrators and for the customers, but also for you guys. Christie projectors are throughout both the NHL and the NBA. When you guys get notified of a potential client looking at this, right, looking at projection mapping onto ice or onto a floor, walk me through what you guys need from the customers and how you walk them through the process of assessing their needs when they say, I want to do this. I want to do ice projection.
Sure. It's a great question. So first thing that's a little bit different with us being the manufacturing this is when we say a customer, our customer is often the integrator and not the actual end user themselves, right? So the integrator will typically have a discussion with the end user at some point, finding out what their needs are. And then what they will do is then they will communicate with us what some of those needs are. And as you mentioned, in some venues where they're doing and every venue is different, right? So you may have a particular venue where they're only interested in doing on-ice projection mapping, whereas another venue, they'll be switching between on-ice and basketball if they happen to have both levels of teams, right? And at that point, that's typically when the integrator will provide us either with drawings or specific plans about a given arena or a venue. And then we have a fulfillment team at Christie, which will look at those particular plans and find out from them, what kind of brightness is usually the one important thing that we want to determine. Pretty much every one of the on-ice or on-court projection, they will have some stacking involved. And what I mean by that is, let's say you end up using a 2x3 array of projectors on the ice, 2 high, 3 wide to cover the entire ice. Most venues will then double stack another 2x3 projectors on there. So you'd have a total of 12 projectors potentially doing your ice. And you're doing that for two reasons. One, for the brightness of having two projectors hitting the same place, but also for redundancy, right? Should you have, it's unlikely, but should you have an issue with a projector or a lamp or something happens if using lamp-based, you don't want to have a gap in your show on the ice. So we always recommend if we have, if it's integrators that have worked in this space quite often, they'll know this right off the hop. If it's a smaller integrator, maybe that's doing a college level type application with smaller budgets, they might be willing to take the risk of going without the backup projectors or the stacked projectors. But to get back to your question, ultimately it's what's the brightness level, whether it's going to be a multi-purpose, venue, if they plan on moving, if the lenses need to be shifted between different venues. Like the coverage you have on an ice rink is much larger than a basketball court, for instance. So sometimes it's best to move the lenses. And then finally, the important piece is when you're using these type of multi-projector displays, you need some sort of way of keeping it looking good, right? So the alignment piece, which is where on top of providing projectors, Christy has an auto alignment solution which helps keep the projectors aligned and is a camera-based system, because trying to have one of these systems set up without having some sort of automation system can frankly turn into a nightmare in terms of keeping them aligned, especially when different venues are coming through and so on.
So the kind of the making sure that when they do the installation that they include all those different pieces to make sure that in a week, a month, or 6 months down the road, within the season, they haven't shifted in some way, shape, or form.
Exactly. And when you say within the season, I can tell you there are some venues where, they'll go from a hockey game to a basketball game the next day, to a concert the next day, back to a hockey game. And sometimes they're those projectors are mounted on truss, and that truss ends up getting used for other things. So they go out of alignment, right? Because things get moved between these different venues. You also have things like environmental conditions, right? Sometimes when you fire it up, it takes a little bit of time for the projectors to warm up, or even the temperature in the venue, and that can cause some misalignment. So having a tool that will take you a minute or a minute and a half per projector to realign is basically one thing that we basically tell our customers: you have to have this, because if you don't have it, you won't be happy with this long term, because it's going to be very hard to maintain. And at the end of the day, the end customer, who is a particular, they're the ones who are going to be operating it, right? And the integrator doesn't want to have to constantly be called back in to realign it because there's issues. They want the end customer being able to do this. So that's why we feel that it's a key component of any of these systems, and we always steer our customers in that direction.
All right, so we've got the systems assessed, the customers' needs assessed. Figured out where they are in terms of workflow and the capabilities of the teams, customers' teams. Folks from Image Engineering, I'll start with you on this. Now that you have that information, kind of give me a rough project length. Like, let's say we're posting this in the middle of the Stanley Cup playoffs, which thank God the St. Louis Blues are still in it for the first time in 50 years, and I'll say that for the rest of the playoffs. But let's say they come to you, or the folks in Chicago come to you, which are no longer in another, the Bulls or the Hawks, and they say, you know what, best case scenario, our team takes it all the way. Right, and they win the NBA championship, or they win the Stanley Cup. So you can get in July 1. From July 1, what's a rough project length?
So, we want, our target goal is going to be to deliver a system that is fully up and running, the creative and the technical teams are comfortable working with by opening night. We want to give them a big, exciting exclamation point to start their season on. And so we will then work backwards from that point to understand what our deadlines and our milestones need to be. And typically we want to have a soft open or a fully functioning system during preseason, so that the technical teams can get comfortable with running and operating the system, so that the creative teams can see how the graphics, the imagery all looks on the ice, giving them enough time to make any tweaks or changes, so that first opening night show is as powerful, exciting, impactful as it can be. So we use that kind of as our jumping off point. And then we back up understanding what lead times are for equipment, when we need to, obviously, as Nick alluded to earlier, these are busy buildings that we're going into. And so understanding when they have time periods for us to come in to do any kind of rigging, infrastructure installation. And so we back up from that point to understand how much time we have in actually getting the gear in-house. And then before that even happens, we need to get with the building and the venue technical teams to understand where we can rig projectors, where are network switches, where are fiber patch panels, and all different things like that. Or do we need to run brand new infrastructure because it doesn't exist there yet? And so we use all of that so that we can build our line drawings, our milestone timelines, and we will usually end up using every bit of that time from July 1 through the middle of September to complete this project. Obviously, with certain pieces taking longer than others. We specify the equipment, we know what the equipment is going to be, so we try and get that knocked out immediately, and then use that lead time portion to hammer out infrastructure and how content is getting from media server to the projectors, or how your network is getting from control room to the projectors. Anything else?
No, and the other side you also have to look at is if it was a more condensed timeline, such as the Dallas Stars, who did make it into round 2 and said in a week's turnaround time, hey, we want to do ice projection. Is it impossible? No. Did it take everybody on our team to pull it off? Yes. So we've run into that as well, where we know that based upon a slightly unrealistic timeline, we can pull from our rental inventory and at least get a system in to meet the deadline.
And I think that's actually a really good point. If things on the infrastructure or the installation side become condensed, we can shift gears and look at it a little bit more from a touring or a live event side, where not everything is fully completed for permanent installation, but we run off of temporary power distros, or we run temporary fiber or temporary network cables, so that we can get them in and operational. And then the infrastructure part, which tends to take longer, we buy ourselves some more time so that we get that done correctly and to the standards that we would want to see it as.
All right, Eric, talking about project length, you mentioned, some folks may, if they make the playoffs or what have you, we're recording this, we're posting this in the middle of the Stanley Cup playoffs. My home team, for the first time in 50 years, the St. Louis Blues, is finally in it. Is this something where they won this on a Tuesday night? Could they call you on a Wednesday morning and say, you know what, Eric, we're in the frickin' Stanley Cup finals, right? We got to have something. And our first home game is in a week. Or actually, it would be in 9 days. Is that project length fine for you?
So first off, I think one thing I'll say is that actually does happen all the time. Playoffs are one of the most fun times of the year because almost invariably we get a call that's going to say, hey, if we make the next round of playoff, if we make the next round of playoffs, what happens? What are our options? What can we do? And what can we do given 5 days, 8 days, 10 days? Usually what I recommend for those particularly tight scenarios of playoffs, I'd say 8 to 10 days is possible. We own the gear, we have the gear, and Christie has really made it easy with auto convergence technologies and 30K projectors to get this installed quickly. But usually the building logistics are even some of the bigger hurdles. What you run into during the playoffs in particular is other things need to happen, extra skate time for the team, extra media time. Maybe there might be laying down towels for the fans. All these elements take away from a very tight, arena schedule. So what it comes down to is finding the time, because the gear and the technologies become so user-friendly, it's so easy to use. We can work around tight timelines. Now, I will say that, outside of playoffs, we usually recommend 30 days to really get time to develop content and plan things and plan the rigging. But we've done as tight as 8 to 10 days, and that's completely achievable.
From both a rental standpoint and an install standpoint?
From a rental specifically standpoint.
Okay. if you had your preference, and let's talk about whether it's the NBA or the NHL, because a lot of these facilities are dual purpose, right? I'm thinking of United Center up in Chicago that has both the Blackhawks and the Bulls. If you had your druthers and they're talking to you before the seasons even end, and you go, okay, you know what, July 1, because by then both seasons are over. What sort of timeline from an install standpoint are you looking at?
Okay, so in terms of actual commitment to project installation, we've done as tight as 4 or 5 weeks, ideally 2 months. But the same thing is, what's great is there's a little additional rigging, a little additional cabling, but the actual setup and calibration of the system is not incredibly different from one to the other. The only extra added time there is getting rigging and weight loads permanently certified, and the actual delivery of new gear from the manufacturer. But all these lead times are getting shorter all the time. So what's really interesting is what I've learned over the years is budget cycles for a lot of these teams always tend to push deeper and deeper into the summer as the years go by. So it seems like we get some of these calls later every year, but we've been able to partner with manufacturers and really make this achievable. It'll make this something that's relatively painless for the teams.
All right, Joel, from you guys' perspective, what would you say is a typical project length for installation, for an install?
So we do find that most of again, they vary per installation depending on how many projectors. For the simple ones that might just use, you could do as little as 4 projectors. It's something that could essentially be done over a weekend or a week type thing. And it really boils down to how much are you getting done by the integrator? How much is the integrator doing? Are they running your cable? Are they doing your rigging? Are they doing all that? If they have, how big is their team? So I wouldn't say there's a formula. Now, when you're talking with the higher end, and I'll give you an example. We have an arena that has 18 of our boxer projectors doing the ice in a triple stack. Obviously, you're talking about 18, 30,000 lumen projectors. They're all quite heavy. Getting them mounted the height they need to be, then getting everything aligned, getting everything wired, that will be a lot more complex, and it's probably something that's going to take a couple weeks probably to set up. But at the end of the day, this is probably a question that is better answered by the integrator, because we will assist integrators in doing these venues, but there's usually an integrator that's driving it, and we're just assisting and possibly going in and providing some training and so on once everything is set up.
So you said that there's not a formula, and forgive my ignorance on this, but we're talking about a hockey arena or a hockey rink, and we're talking about a basketball court. Those are pretty uniform, pretty uniform spaces. But you're saying that each install is unique and different. Yeah,
in the sense that again, it goes back down to how much brightness are you going to need for this space. There are arenas now that are looking at not only projecting on ice, but doing some projection partially in the audience as well, right? Or maybe doing some projection on, flat spaces that they have around on the upper rings, for example, right? So it really depends on the type of application, what they're going to be doing. Like for example, what they did, at the Golden Knights arena is different than what they did, in Denver for Colorado, right? They chose different projectors. They chose different brightness levels. One arena has double stack. The other one is triple stack. Even though it is quite, you're talking about like it's an ice rink, it's a basketball court. How different can it be? At the end of the day, you want to cover the entire surface with light from projection, and then your content will then be driven by some sort of media server. So that piece is always going to be a given, but the projectors you choose, the illumination that you choose, some folks go lamp-based, some folks want to go laser illumination. There are various variables, I guess you can say, which will impact each installation somewhat differently, right? And those all lend themselves to how much time it takes to get those set up.
All right, now, Joel, we've talked a couple of different times, and the guys have as well, about getting the end customer, the person, the facility that's putting these in up to speed, right? And these folks have been used to digital signage, or what I'll call stadium signage, for years now. But projection mapping is a different animal altogether. It's a different resolution. It's a different aspect ratio, the whole bit. How do you guys help not just the integrators, but also, again, the facilities folks get their team ramped up when it comes to running these unique, installations?
So I think one of from Christie's perspective, one of the differentiators that we've had for years and continue to have is that we do a lot of our onboard electronics, and in terms of ways of manipulating the image, warping the images, aligning the images. These are all things that we have a complete software team at Christie who are dedicated to doing this, right? You can call it value add, if you will. Because at the end of the day, if you take, three 30,000 lumen projectors from three different, high-end manufacturers, they're all going to look good, right? What ends up being the differentiator is how easy are they to set up? How easy are they to maintain? How easy is it to service those particular units, right? How resilient are they in terms of use and dealing with pyro and other things that might happen in an arena. So from a Christie perspective, we've always tried to treat these type of venues like arenas and so on as a solution. So we won't typically just quote a projector when an integrator comes to us. We offer a solution that might be a projector, a Pandora's Box media server, which is a media server we own as well. I mentioned already the auto alignment system, Christie Mystique, which basically is the camera-based alignment system. All of those things essentially, make the whole solution much easier for our integrators to go and pitch and install, because they have one company to deal with, right? Whereas some other applications end up using a lot of third-party components from various companies, and then it's a little bit more challenging sometimes for them to make sure everything gets lined up, everything gets delivered, that all the systems are talking to each other. We've done several arenas now with this solution approach, and it's worked really well for us. And even at the point of quoting, where we can provide a rough order of magnitude quote for pretty much everything you're going to need, from the alignment to the projection to the media server, coming from one company is helpful when you're an integrator trying to pitch something to an end user, right? So I think that's how we help prepare our integrators. And as I mentioned earlier as well, we do have a fulfillment team who can help an integrator who may be new at this or hasn't done a particular venue. They can come to us, provide us with drawings, give us an idea of what the end user wants, and then we will come up with a configuration, a proposal for them, which they can then pass along to their customer. And I think that goes a long way.
Eric, you talked about making sure that the client's team is ready for this. How do you get them ready from a training perspective, for moving to doing projection mapping as opposed to just kind of typical stadium signage?
Okay. Oh, that's one of my favorite questions. So two sides of the coin. When we come to the rental and staging side, we'd like to take a little bit of a larger role, an active role in operating, planning, content development. When it comes down to the other side of the coin, the permanent installation side, we're very big on empowering our clients. So one thing is every system we install comes with extensive training. So that's going to be training on the media server system, projector maintenance on operation, as well as any rigging and annual servicing that needs to happen for the display units themselves. What that allows them to do is, if they have an ops team, if they have a content team, the content team is going to have a template for the ice, a template for the court. They're going to have an operational interface to program content quickly. Then on the flip side of things, operations-wise, they have, what we're doing more and more is automated rigging systems. They're able to check lensing, check lamps, check power for projectors over the year, service these projectors in the summer, make things as painless for the operations side as well. And in particular, one thing that's been huge over the years is whenever you're talking projection mapping versus digital signage or LED, you're talking about one added component that a lot of folks aren't used to, and that's projector convergence. Worth noting, all of our more recent installs, we're talking about 12 to 18 4K projectors with discrete 4K signal to each. And what that requires to get that sharpness over that size and that brightness over that size is actually the ability to converge and align all these projectors to create one seamless image. To do that in the past was a little more manual process, but over the last couple of years with Christie Mystique, we've been able to make that a one button click process. So that cuts down training time for the teams, that cuts down dark time in the arena, makes the operations of the venue and game day operations a little bit smoother. And that's really been a huge thing for both personnel, staff, training, and time.
All right, folks from Image Engineering, we've got everything together. We've got project planning. We've got assessing needs, and you talked about this, Nick. You did about making sure that the team was up and running. That in other words, the facilities, the folks that are running this stuff. How do you get that if they're not ready? How do you go to get them trained to go from doing what's typical a typical arena digital signage, right? The stuff around the stadium to getting their head wrapped around doing ice and court mapping?
So a lot of it is coming in and having those candid discussions with their teams of what they feel their creative capabilities are and what they feel their guys are able to bite off and chew, and then providing examples, because we've had the privilege of doing a number of installs and having content that we've created for these other teams and stuff, and being able to go in and go, look, we really can't use the actual content itself per se, but this is the template, this is the workflow that works the best, and work with them to get through it. And then the other thing is our art staff here is always a phone call away to walk them through, and a lot of times we'll actually hold their hand through the first full season of, hey, you need this extra piece built, we'll take care of that for you, or let's see what you're thinking for this, and maybe if we bump the contrast here or change this piece of content around, this is going to give you a little bit more of what you're looking for. So it's always that service after the sale that kind of helps bring them along, but at the end of the day, you got to make sure that you have the right people there to do it.
Yeah, and I think Nick is really right on point that it's a lot of this is about having a candid conversation at the very beginning of the project and understanding the comfort level of the team to take on the operation of this brand new system. We look at certain instances, like when we worked with the Vegas Golden Knights, and they were a brand new team in a brand new arena, and so they were trying to wrap their heads around the all of their systems, cameras, DAC, center hung, all of it, and then to add a layer in of the projection system, which not a lot of folks come from that background where they are familiar or comfortable with the media servers and how those interact with the projection and the ice mapping and all of that. So for clients who are in that kind of situation, as Nick said, it is a lot of hand-holding and support, actually being there for them, or having some of our team there longer than we normally would have to assist in operation, so that those folks can get comfortable with the system, but also have the safety net of having our team or our experts on site there with them. Should anything arise or they have questions, that person is right there and able to answer and educate them. And so a lot of it really is based in candid conversations from the outset to make sure that everybody knows exactly where we're going and that we're going to be there to help them get there.
And then the other thing we tend to do a lot more of these days is also building in that remote support. And it's twofold, actually. One thing, it's having that remote connection in to be able to support them and see what's going on and walk them through it. But it's also the cross training that happens back on our team side, so that everybody that is on our support side knows that system inside and out, knows what they're up against, knows kind of where they are, so you can pick up the phone, call, and no matter who picks it up here, we know where you're at and we can help you.
Well, and I'll say this as a hockey fan, the Golden Knights were probably in the top five. I can't pick a favorite, right? But certainly watching the playoffs last year, oh my gosh, it's seriously well done to you guys and well done to the folks that run that. Seriously, one of the top five projection mappings in the NHL. Seriously,
and we have to give a lot of credit to Johnny Greco and his team at the Golden Knights, because we're having to learn an entire arena system at the very beginning of the season, and then where they came to by the end of the season. I mean, that was all them, where they ended up when they were getting that amazing TV coverage and for the game presentation that they put together. We were there to answer some questions and help with a little troubleshooting if they had it. But their team was excited, and they grabbed the bull by the horns when they brought this system on. And their internal team is really responsible for a lot of what fans saw and national audiences saw, which was exciting for us to see how much they were able to grow with the system in just that one season.
Joel, this question is actually more for you than anybody. When you talk with dealers, and you are showing them obviously the different possibilities. I mentioned the fact that we're in the middle of the NHL playoffs, so we're going to be seeing some of these as well. So dealers will be exposed to them, and NBA playoffs are happening as well. How do you educate dealers on the design of this, on how they sell it, and how they deploy them?
That's a good question. So, I mean, one of the things that Christie's done over the last several years, we're a pretty visual company, obviously. So I would say just about every single trade show we've taken part in over the last several years has had some sort of element where we're doing some sort of projection mapping example. Like for several years, we had a central piece in our booth where we were showing a small hockey rink, and we were doing a projection on a surface that looked like a hockey rink. We've had smaller scale models of, an ice rink as well that, will be a tabletop size thing where we have some smaller projectors to illustrate the concept of multiple projectors doing alignment and so on. So we're basically positioning, we're showing, I guess, if you will, integrators that these things are doable, right? They obviously, they see it on TV, but when they're actually walking a trade show and they can come in and they see an ice rink, they're like, wow, that's really cool. Like, how are you doing this? And we can explain the workflow. We can explain, we can say, the media servers are driving the content. Then we have this, these multiple projectors here covering the ice. Then we have an alignment system that keeps it in a line. And then, you do a demonstration, you go and move one, and then you realign it very quickly. They really get it. And they understand that, wow, okay, there's all these complex pieces, but you guys are solving a lot of the things that I either hadn't thought about, or there's contingency there in case something goes wrong, right? Yeah. And I think having that face-to-face and being able to show people these things is super important, right? We ended up creating a small traveling roadshow kit with a 3D printed ice rink, which we actually can send to some of our integrators. In fact, it's on loan right now with Quince, I believe. And they're basically using that with some of their models to sort of pitch the idea to end users and customers, right? Because it really gives you, it's one thing to look at a CAD drawing or a model, but when you're able to actually see something live in front of you with projected images and content, it goes a long way in helping the integrators actually sell that solution to the end user, right? The end customer. And the last thing I want to say too is there are obviously people who've been doing this a long time, like Quince, for instance, but there are some smaller integrators. Like I said, we're getting a lot more interest at the college level, especially in the United States, where whether it's basketball or hockey or so on, or in the professional leagues, hockey leagues that are not NHL but state level, they are essentially starting to be interested in this, and they don't necessarily know where to start, right? So we've created, if you will, these bundles that include, projectors. We have different tiers, right? The minimalist, if you will, which is basically just enough light to cover your rink without having the redundancy there, with an inexpensive media server solution, which again may not have the redundancy. Or if it goes down it's not as big a deal as on live, a live hockey NHL level game, right? But obviously they have smaller budgets, so it gives them an option to do this. But our models go up all the way to, top end, 18 projectors, alignment system, and all that stuff, right? So at the end of the day, this is how we try to educate, our dealers and our customers. But the one piece I think we always push on is the alignment, the auto alignment, right? Because I know of 2 ice rinks that went ahead without the alignment system, and they ended up coming back and putting it in afterwards.
Oh, wow.
So it is definitely I would say a must-have for these types of applications.
Eric, from your perspective, both from a client standpoint as well as other integrators, when you're talking to somebody who's never done projection mapping, or specifically in this case, ice or arena mapping, what are some hurdles that you would kind of tell them about, kind of warn them about beforehand?
All right, excellent. So this is actually a pretty in-depth answer here. So I'm going to tackle this from sort of an integrator side. So the one thing I could say is, one specialty of Quint is, we originally were founded as a projection specialist firm. We've expanded over the years, but we've built, 25 plus years of experience in just projection, image mapping technologies, and projection service installation and maintenance. And, one of the big things we've learned over the years is that, projection has so many more facets to consider than a screen. You have to consider things like ambient light, projector convergence, lamp and laser illumination measurements, and maintenance over time. Things that are not, as common as in LED walls, monitor walls, other forms of digital signage. Things like converging 12 or 18 projectors, that's something that, for us comes with the territory and have been doing for years. But LED installation, LED specialists don't always get a lot of that experience. It's here's the wall, here's the single surface. We're used to converging those surfaces, integrating them with other displays, and some of those specialty workflows. So that's kind of how we tackle that. And then in terms of the actual, hurdles for the client-facing side, we try to eliminate as many of those as possible. I mean, the one thing that I never want to undervalue is we try to make this as seamless as possible for the end user perspective. And sometimes a lot of the complexity gets lost in that. What we're able to do is control systems to monitor all the projectors, monitor their status remotely, control the projector lamps, shutters, all remotely, as well as control content, load content, align projectors, putting all those features into one custom design interface for the client. Because what ends up happening is for any professional team is they have sort of a core full-time staff as well as supplemental game day staff. And when you have that supplemental staff, you want to make sure you have this sophisticated system that has a lot of robustness, redundancy, all that good stuff built in. But when they come to sit down, someone who's maybe operated this thing once or twice and has had training from only one person at the venue, that they can look and they can find all their key cues, find the status, be alerted if there's any issues, and be able to just have a friendly guide where they can come at it and they're not losing any time on game day, because game day is just so valuable.
Joe, from Christy's perspective, what are some hurdles that you guys have witnessed over the years that you would warn a new integrator? Let's say they come to you and say, you know what, Joel, I've got this arena, they want to do this ice mapping thing. I've never done it before. What sort of hurdles would you say that you would warn them about?
I think one of the key ones is brightness, right? You're spending all this money to put a pre-game show on, if you will. You want to make sure it's going to really pop. So we do recommend higher brightness projectors, and if they don't necessarily have the budget to go, with some 30,000 lumen projectors that are stacked, or 40,000, whichever, then we recommend they do, at least a couple 15,000 plus projectors in a stack configuration. Having the stack is important because it gives you the double brightness, but it also does give you that redundancy should something happen, so you don't end up with a gap. And then should something happen in a live show, you can quickly shutter the projectors a set of projectors that are affected, and then you'll have a show that's not as bright, but at least it'll be uniform because you had an issue with one of your displays or your source or whatever, right? So, the redundancy is very important. Making sure you have enough brightness is important. And something that will allow you to keep it looking on day one the same way as it, 4 months down the road, you want it looking as good as it was on day one from an alignment perspective and so on. And this is where having a camera-based alignment system that you can schedule, that you can connect to an automation system that likely is in your arena or your venue to trigger multiple systems. Running a calibration to make sure the projectors are aligned just becomes another thing that gets done before every show, right? And that goes a long way in keeping the end customer happy with something they feel is sustainable without having to constantly go back to their integrators because they're having challenges.
Guys from Image Engineering, let's kind of wrap this up here. If you were advising an integrator today that, let's say that they've got a client, they've never done ice mapping before, and they want their folks, they want their integrator to get into it, and this integrator is like sitting here going, I've never done this before. How would you advise them? What sort of hurdles that you guys have encountered that maybe you didn't expect to?
So the first thing is to have the candid discussion with them saying, look, this is what you're getting yourself into. And then kind of, I hate to say it, but going through the pitfalls that we've kind of experienced and worked our way through with them so they know what they're looking for when they're looking for. LED signage is one of the biggest things. I don't care how bright the projectors are. When you add more ambient light, you lose the contrast. So we could keep adding more and more projectors on the ice and make it brighter and brighter and brighter. But the more light you add to working with them to understand what when we go into a project, what we're looking for, so they understand it, and then getting them the support. So when they start speccing it out, either a company that's done it like us or a Quince or some of the other guys out there that are really good at it, getting them just to look over it and kind of say, yes, you're on the right track with this.
Yeah. I would agree with all of that. And then also, having them really understand the timelines and what's necessary from an infrastructure side, and how, we really always need to look at this as a partnership between the integrator, the venue that this equipment is going to live in, and then the team who's going to be operating it. And how, from the very beginning, everybody needs to be on the same page. The communication needs to be clear and streamlined because, as we talked about before, these timelines are usually fairly short for what we're trying to undertake. And so communication and a solid team all around who is on the same page every step of the way is invaluable. Having a great manufacturer, kind of like the folks from Christie, who are there to provide high-level support, engineering support to review and look over lens calculations and position placement and all of that, just to get a second set of eyes on it. And those guys are happy to do that because they want to make sure that their product looks as good as it possibly can as well, is huge. So, not looking at this as you're forging the path alone, but that it really is truly a team effort, is wildly important.
All right, guys from Image Engineering, Nick Hawk and Ian Badaglari, thank you guys. How do people get a hold of you if they're so inclined? Sure.
So thanks for having us. The best way to reach us is our website. So it's imageengineering.com. We also do have a fairly active Facebook and Instagram account, and you can just find that by searching Image Engineering as well. We like to keep our clients and fans updated on our most recent projects, so you'll be able to find it there.
All right, and Joel St. Denis from Christie has been with us. Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate you having me on, and hopefully we've educated some folks a little bit on how we go about this. Thanks.
Absolutely. And how do people get a hold of you or Christie?
So best way to get a hold of us is essentially you can go to the Christie website at www.christiedigital.com, and we have a contacts page there with all the information. In terms of myself directly, if there's any specific questions, it's just joel.stdenis@christiedigital.com.
All right. Also with us is Eric Gazillo. Eric is from Quince Imaging. Thank you, sir. And how do people get a hold of you?
If anyone has any more questions, we're pretty easy to get a hold of. You're based right outside of Washington, D.C. We can always be reached at quinceimaging.com, and we're always happy to help.
For us, for AVNation, you can buy the website avnation.tv, avnation.tv. Find other programs such as this, as well as our 2 weekly programs. All that and more at avnation.tv. AVNation.